Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, one of the things that we can take away from the bizarre things that have been happening in Charlotte, North Carolina, in response to, yet again, more police-involved shootings with Black Americans, is that the strain of identity politics that has been foisted upon us by the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists is continuing to be a major distractor and problem. Of course, identity politics is nothing new. It's something that the left has relied upon for decades now. And they just seem to double down upon it with each successive election cycle. And folks, it really does not show any signs of getting better at any point in the foreseeable future. And the reason it's not going to get better is this literally is what they have based their entire campaign apparatus off of. We know that Barack Hussein Obama has had meetings with some of the founders of Black Lives Matters, which I have labeled as a domestic terrorist organization, and this only encourages them to continue to engage in such barbarism and just this lack of respect or restraint or anything with authorities and authority figures in this country. And of course, this all ties into the notion that the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists are doing everything in their power to tear this nation apart at the seams. And so what they will do is they'll embrace anything, whether it's true or not, to try and push their narrative forward. In fact, that's one of the major things that I've heard with respect to these slew of protests and race-based riots that have basically become a hallmark of the second term of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. It's that they don't care about facts. These people do not care about facts. And again, folks, that ties directly into this line of thought that they have, which is that they will preach their narrative come hell or high water, irrespective of the detrimental and deleterious impact that it might have upon culture or society in general. But, as I said, this is not new. We have seen it before. Recall that when John Edwards was attempting to run for president, that he came out with this ridiculous line of having two Americas. Two Americas for what? What two separate Americas to which did he speak? And really, when you start to delve into it, it's not that there were two separate Americas. It's that their vision for America does not coincide with the natural law tenets that underpin both our shared United States Constitution and our representative Republican form of government. So this line of thought of being separate, that is a quintessential aspect or an intrinsic part of the nature of what these leftists want to see come to fruition in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. It's about power and control. That is what they care about. And so if they can pit American citizen against American citizen, it's all the better for them, because it means that they can step up their efforts to try and redefine this nation, to redefine the people, to redefine the way that our system of polity and government works. And in the end, it ultimately harms the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. That's the goal. You see, deep down, they don't trust us. They don't believe that we have the ability to think for ourselves. They think that they hold all the cards, that they are the ones who truly understand the nature of the United States of America. And so they act in a fashion that can only be described as arrogance. And they are arrogant, because what they are trying to foist upon us is their own agenda. But deep down, they know that we don't accept their agenda. Because when you look at the natural law tenets that underpin our nation, going back to its inception, it's that we are based on these self-evident truths. And again, it bears mentioning again here because it's so on point. When Thomas Jefferson put down those near prophetic, in fact, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that they were absolutely prophetic words in the Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain fundamental and unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is America. It is the only definition of America that applies. It is the only rational and reasoned understanding of the United States which will ever be applicable if we are to maintain our solidarity and unity as a nation and as a people. But remember that these Fabian socialist leftists are not about us being a strong, robust, united, and just great people, because deep down, they are the ones that seek to hold all of the cards. They, in a sense, are the ones seeking to just go forth and control the power. And when they embrace such a point of view, it really does work against us. It really does allow ugly things like Black Lives Matters to come into fruition. And of course, it's based on this whole idea that the United States of America is systemically racist, is systemically classist. And what they're really doing is pushing forth this sense of projection. They're projecting their own beliefs, their own twisted and dark machinations onto the body politique of the United States of America, because deep down they know that in a free marketplace of ideas, no one would accept their twisted way of thought. No one would ever want to see the United States of America break down into this tribalism, except those who loathe and despise anything and everything that the United States has ever stood for. And that's what we're seeing with the ascendancy of the so-called alternative or alt-right. It's what we're seeing with groups like Black Lives Matters, and it's all designed to heighten up tension in the rank and file of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. And there's really something dark and nefarious about what they're attempting to pull off here, because it is so diametrically opposed to everything that we were ever founded upon. But that narrative of there being two Americas, I think it ties directly into this, and it has only been ratcheting up in election cycle after successive election cycle. And therefore, I think it's important that we take a moment to listen in to some of the words of failed presidential candidate and socialist, but he wasn't self-avowed, like Vermont Senator Nerdface Boy Me Sanders, who we will get to in a minute, but John Edwards. I want to go back and refresh our memories with respect to what he did with that stump-thumping speech of Two Americas, because I think it really does help shed light onto the twisted machinations that they're trying to foist upon us against our will, and then we can certainly discuss it in further detail and tie it in to why it's applicable even in this 2016 presidential election cycle, despite the fact that John Edwards is not in the running now, and in fact that his entire political career has been destroyed because he was cheating on his wife when she was ill, terminally ill, and it's disgusting. But anyway, let's go ahead and key up John Edwards giving that little brouhaha speech back in 2007. So here we go. I'm going to cue that up now.
I want to start, if I can, by talking about the two Americas, which some of you have heard me talk about in the past and which are still alive and thriving in this country. But I want to be clear, when I'm talking about two Americas, I'm not just talking about the difference between the rich and the poor. I'm talking about the very rich and everybody else. That's the two Americas. There are so many things that we can do. For those people who say, oh, we fought a war on poverty, we can't change this. Oh, yeah, we can. I got more confidence in America than those people do. I know we can change it. Some of the things are pretty simple. making work pay. For example, people who are working, they ought to earn a decent living wage so they can support their families.
That's really what it comes down to, folks, is that they believe that the system is inherently unfair. They think that there is this wage gap that is inaccessible to get across. Of course, they never seem to have a problem with the fact that it's they themselves who have put in all of these draconian regulations that have supported that. They never really talk about how it's their own failed policies that have made it to where people can't make a decent living wage. And it's all based on a lie. And of course, if we recall what Aristotle said in his Art of Rhetoric, it was that people will more easily believe the truth because it is the truth. We are hardwired to accept the truth, and therefore, when you have to lie, it means that you have to just engage in a more intellectually disingenuous position, because after all, a lie is not the truth, and the truth is ultimately what always has a way of shining through, but that doesn't matter to them. Again, it's about their agenda come hell or high water. But why is it that they always want to push this? Well, it's because that is the only way that they can convince the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty that there is something inherently or intrinsically wrong with the United States. And that's what they believe. So John Edwards was out there saying that he had faith in the American people to change them, but what he was really speaking to was the fact that he had faith that he could undermine this great representative Republican system of government that we've had going back to the inception of this country. He didn't talk about how we have the strongest, most robust, most stable system of government to have ever been devised by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by providence above. He didn't speak to the natural tenets or the natural law tenets of our shared United States Constitution, because again, it would undermine this position that they have been going forth with for all these years. This idea of identity politics, it sounds so benign on the surface, but when you begin to peel back the layers and analyze it in an objective fashion, the truth begins to shine through, and it's an ugly thing. It's an ugly thing because it really does not go to the nature of who we are. But we noticed that in 2004, it didn't work when John Kerry was trying to use that drivel in his run against then President George W. Bush. It didn't work before that in 2000 with Al Gore, but it is starting to sink in. And part of the reason for that is just to the great extent they've managed to take control of our information media outlets and our institutions of education from coast to coast and border to border. So, in a sense, what they're doing is a three-pronged attack on the pillars of society. And in so doing, they are working to the great detriment of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. But what makes the nation strong and robust? What is it that makes us a great people? It's this idea that the individual popular sovereign is the one who is endowed with certain fundamental and inalienable rights. And those rights are codified in the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution. In that codification, it explicitly details what the government cannot do to the American people. Now, of course, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists always try and attempt to besmirch and belittle that, attacking it with, once again, their dark and twisted game of semantics, trying to claim that, well, it's negative rights. Now, instantly, when you hear negative rights, that sounds bad. Negative, negative. It always brings up this dark, twisted, or evil connotation with it, and that is by design. Again, it's as the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs had said in his magnus opus of Keynes at Harvard back in the late 1950s and early 1960s, that they play with words, because they will use draconian regulation, overzealous regulation of the private sector, so that we are just so immersed in attempting to maintain our quality of life, our standard of living, that we are just incapable of really staying abreast of everything that they're trying to throw at us. And it all ties in to this message that they have. It's not a message of unity. And I think one of the most disingenuous things that they say is that they are the party for the little guy, that they're out there trying to make everyone equal. But again, it comes down to how we interpret equality in the United States of America. Traditionally, equality has always been viewed as equal opportunity as opposed to equal outcome. But people like John Edwards and Vermont Senator Nerdface Bernie Sanders are about equal outcome. They think it's unfair that someone is able to put forward the wherewithal and the ability and the ingenuity to create for themselves, to build for themselves, to gain a better life for themselves, and therefore they just want to preach on this narrative of divisiveness. It's why they always turn to the tried and true, albeit threadbare tactics and strategies of divide and conquer. By pitting American citizen against American citizen, what they are essentially hoping to achieve is that they gain the ability to weaken us, because they have distracted us to the point of where we are blaming one another as opposed to the failed public policy positions of the various branches of government, particularly when those various branches of government are controlled by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. And we can certainly see that that has been the case in these two disastrous terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. He has not embraced policies that literally help the American people. He has not embraced a position that's in our best interest. It's all about growing the size of the central government, because deep down, that is the faith they have. And it might also explain why they are so hostile to religion and having faith in this nation, except for those that push for a collectivist mentality like the Islamo-fascist barbarians. And so literally what we're seeing with respect to these race-based riots that have just erupted in Charlotte, North Carolina, is they are playing into the identity politics, but they also play into it with the Islamo-fascist terrorists who have also been attacking us. And so we see that the amount of time, or the spread of time between the Islamo-fascist attacks and then these domestic terrorist attacks engaged in and orchestrated by the domestic terrorist organization, the Black Lives Matters group, are coinciding. It's coinciding to further, to further stress the American people, to further build tension up in these United States of America, in the hopes that it would be a Cloward Piven type scenario. Again, overwhelming the system so that the American people come to the government on bended knee, begging the government to have solutions brought forth for them, when in fact the government is really not always the best one to answer these things or to force these sorts of things. Yes, the government is there to provide for national security, but what they're seeking with respect to law enforcement and going after these law enforcement personnel during these sorts of race-based attacks on society in general is they want to get rid of local law enforcement, to just simply say that they don't have enough of the training that's necessary to keep the nation safe, and therefore we have to have a centralized police force. This is what dictatorial types and authoritarians and totalitarians always do all throughout history. You see it with Hitler and the establishment of the Gestapo and the SS. You see it with the Stasi becoming the KGB in Soviet Russia. And you saw it in Vietnam and in Korea and all of these places that had adopted communism. Why? Because it ultimately comes down to wanting to have complete control of everything. But they always start with this notion of there being a great and unfair divide between the uber wealthy and the rest of the country. And certainly that was a pinnacle of failed presidential candidate and self avowed socialist Vermont Senator Nerdface Bernie Sanders. Why? Because he went forth and tried to say we have the 1% and they are controlling everything. And as long as the 1% are allowed to go forth and control everything, we are going to continue to have problems in this country. Not mentioning that government was at the root of this. And in fact, I've got a soundbite that I'm going to queue up for you with respect to this, just because it's important to recall this. And in fact, if memory serves me correctly, this is one of his campaign videos. So here we go. I'm going to queue it up now.
Here's the simple truth, that in America we have millions and millions of working people who are working hard but are not making enough money to put bread on the table or to take care of their kids, and that has got to end.
Today, all over America, you got mom working, you got dad working, occasionally you have the kids working, and we still don't have enough money to pay.
Did you hear that? That part where he was sitting there saying, occasionally we have the kids working. Now, I understand that Bernie Sanders doesn't understand how work is done or how employment works in this nation, because he didn't receive his first paycheck until he was 40 plus years old. What it really is, folks, is that he ignores that we have labor laws that have prohibited child labor for well over a half century now. It's that he doesn't care about what the truth is. They just go forth and make things up. And so it's all designed, once again, to pit American citizen against American citizen in the hopes that we will tear each other apart, in the hopes that we will believe these lies, because that's the only way they can move forward. If they were to tell the truth, that this is the most robust, the most free, the most open, the most honest and stable system that we have ever had, then these people, and indeed just people in general, would laugh them out of existence. Why? Because again, it's just beyond belief, the things they are saying. What they are advocating for has no basis in reality, has no root in our natural law tenets. But recall that Bernie Sanders is of the type that believes the state holds all the answers. But when you look at our foundational documents and you look at the true history of the United States of America, we can see that it is a free and open and honest society. One that cannot simply bow down and bear witness to these destructive forces that they're doing, because it's diametrically opposed to who we are, who we have been, and who we will be. You see, the natural law tenets are by their nature timeless. They tie into who we are, both as a nation and as a people. And unless and until we are willing to admit that that is the true aspect of who we are, we're going to continue to see these charlatans stir up the anger and the bitterness that they have been. And that leads to the sorts of things that we're seeing in Charlotte, North Carolina. And part of what it comes down to is the whole notion of identity politics. Instead of saying that there is one robust national identity for the United States of America, they're trying to say that we can't understand one another, that we can't come together in solidarity and unity. And therefore, what we have to do is form special types of laws just for certain groups of people, because of just how unfair, intrinsically, systemically, that the United States of America is. That is the load of drivel that they want us to believe. And that is what they have made the entire foundation of their of the platform that they have. And it's truly disgusting, because it's intellectually disingenuous. It goes against the natural way and order of things that this nation has been based upon for well over 2 centuries, and it plays into this narrative of spreading hatred and animosity and distrust and dislike. But ultimately, is that who we are? I think that's a question we haven't asked ourselves. And it is a question that we as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, need to sit down and ask ourselves, who are we? Because clearly what this is a battle for the hearts, souls, and minds of the American people. And unless and until we develop and come to terms with what that true identity is, we're going to continue to see these things play out in ways that are just holistically against all that we hold near and dear. And so they will continue to use this because they think it works to their advantage. And in many ways it has, particularly when the GOP refuses to stand up to them, refuses to do what's necessary to ensure that our stable and free system of government works as it was always and originally intended to work. And so here we are. We find that they have pushed us to the brink of anarchy and revolution. In fact, the communists are already trying to go out and exploit these race riots that are occurring in North Carolina because it plays into their notion of fundamentally and irreparably changing or transforming society. Think about it. Communism can only work with a violent overthrow of a government. At least that is how Karl Marx put it in the four corners of the Communist Manifesto. He says that there has to be this sort of divisiveness. There has to be this sort of carnage and blood spilling. Otherwise, the bourgeoisie, as he would call the upper echelons of society, would continue to hold the upper hand and would continue to oppress the proletariat. And one of the ways that you can really tell that communism cannot work in tandem with our free system of government is this whole idea of what he wanted to name the government run by the workers, this workers' paradise that communism was always about achieving. He referred to it as the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, folks, if that sounds like a very dangerous sort of system and something that is diametrically opposed to the capabilities of the sovereign individual, it's because it is. That's what it is attempting to achieve at its core, at the heart of the matter. That is what they want to achieve. And it's deliberately set up that way. It's deliberately set up to use the grievances of class, or this erroneous notion of class warfare, to try and destroy the political system and ideology as well as philosophy that preceded what they were trying to force onto the scene or into the situation. Now, of course, that is a dangerous position, but it is also one that is very easy to combat. The way that you combat it is that you point to every place that it has ever been attempted to be tried in world history and ask them to demonstrate where it was successful. It's never been successful, but they will always engage in this sort of hair splitting that they do in trying to say, well, the only reason that it's never been successful is no one who's as good or as smart as we are have tried it, the wrong people have been there, or else the facts on the ground or the circumstances that were existing at the time just weren't there for it to be successful. Of course, that's a load of rubbish. It is not intellectually honest. It's not true. But that's what they have to do. They have to engage in chicanery because, again, that is the only way that they know how to move forward with this. That is how they know that they can get their twisted machinations in. And it's why they always break down into this idea of raw emotionalism. By using raw emotionalism, they can try and influence the American people by bamboozling them, by making them come to an erroneous conclusion that they do hold all the cards, that they do understand what's wrong with the nation, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. But we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, and going along the lines of what Sam Adams said that this nation must be, which is a virtuous republic, we are the ones that are expected to take the steps necessary to place this nation back onto the path of prosperity. But that becomes nigh impossible when we're having to try and overcome this intellectual drivel of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, because it's not based on truth. For a prime example, think of the way that they try and say that the science for so-called man-made global warming is settled. Again, it's so that they can push pseudoscience. They are the ones that embrace pseudoscience. They are the ones that embrace things that simply aren't true. And one of the greatest lines of Ronald Reagan was, he said, the problem with our friends on the left is that they just happen to know so much that simply isn't so. And that remains true to this very day. And that is one of the problems that they will never be able to overcome, because they are based on a lie. And so we must get back to the truth. That is the only way that we can get this nation back onto the path to prosperity. What we can see with respect to all of this is that this whole notion of two Americas speaks directly to the tool of the left, that of identity politics. Now, Barack Hussein Obama has been a champion of this. He's worked towards it ever since he first set foot into office back in January of 2009. And one of the areas where we see that identity politics is playing out in such a gross and negative way is with respect to how the Black Lives Matters organization has been treating law enforcement in the United States. There can be no question that they are attempting to say that law enforcement just goes out looking for any excuse to pull over some poor innocent black person and to either beat them to death or to kill them. Now, this certainly is nothing new. It goes to a line that they've been trying to espouse at least since the Rodney King riots that occurred back in 1992. They want to say that racism is a systemic part of the DNA of the United States of America, and therefore what they're really hoping to achieve with that is to say that we can never make things right in this country. But I don't believe that. I believe that that is a nihilistic way, an arrogant way, a self-centered way of looking at how this nation works and approaching the problems that we have, and it's certainly not going to the better angels of our nature. And what that line refers to is the idea that the United States of America is much greater than the sum of its parts. And that ties in to what we have so oft times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that what makes this nation strong and robust is the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. Of course, that requires that we understand our history, that we disregard these charlatans who would do anything and everything in their power to divide and conquer us. But again, the narrative is there. It's one that they are incapable of moving away from, because they have to basically operate from this position that the United States is just some awful place, that the people are horrible, that only the government can basically rein in the true deleterious nature of humanity. And I'm sorry, but I just can't accept that. I can't accept it because the great weight of the evidence, as seen throughout the annals of history, just does not play that out. Show me one nation on earth, apart from the United States of America, that has been as open, as honest, as free, and as all-inclusive as we have been. Show me another nation that has written into its foundational documents that all people are equal. You can't, because there is no other nation on earth that has that as its true intrinsic part of its DNA. But you see, that's the great lie that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists adhere to. It's this idea that the United States of America cannot be a free and fair society, that the United States of America is just hateful. And that is the repetitive strain that they parrot in election cycle after successive election cycle, because they think that will gain them votes. Again, it's this whole notion of there being no national unity. This whole notion of we aren't identified by the supreme law of the land, but rather by our tribal identities. And so this is one of the major disconnects that the traditional conservatives, true dyed-in-the-wool constitutional compositionists, have with the so-called alternative or alt-right. Because the alt-right wants to embrace this sort of, I don't want to call it nativism so much as I do want to call it tribalism, because they want to engage in identity politics. They want to give credence and credibility to this idea that there is some sort of race-based national identity. But it's not nationalism in the true sense of what the United States stands for and represents, and what it has since its foundation some 235 plus years ago. Again, it's falling on penultimate concerns, playing on people's emotions, disregarding the truth, and it all ties into this idea that not everyone can be equal. So, what they really do here, folks, and there's no way around this, is they try to divide and conquer. So now we have supposedly both sides of the political spectrum playing this game of identity politics, applying pressure to the fundamental pillars of these United States of America in an attempt to fundamentally and irreparably transform the United States of America away from being a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic to something that we have never been, to the very sort of system that we tried to break away from. Because what it is a caste system. I know that I've mentioned that before, but look, that's exactly what they do. That's what they engage in. That's what they want to have come to the forefront here. They want us to be defined as a caste system in which certain people are given certain rights just because of how they identify themselves, or the color of their skin, or whatever it may be. But that truly is not who we are. Because when you look at the foundational documents, it is we, the people, that created the government, irrespective of what our ethnicity or race or gender or anything like that is. And the whole reason that Article 5 of the Constitution allows us to amend the Constitution is to address whatever concerns might come up in some future point in time. And they try to ignore that. They try and say that we are the ones that currently, right now, as I sit here and speak into the microphone, are the ones that believe that the Constitution is perfect. Recall the words of Edmund Kozak over there at LifeSet with Laura Ingram. That's not who we are. We're not saying that the Constitution's perfect. We are saying that the Constitution is the closest thing to perfection that we can achieve. That no other nation on earth has come that close to perfection, and that the only way that we're going to be able to overcome all of these hurdles, obstacles, and adversity that have been placed in our path is to band together as a nation and as a people, and to recall what our role and duties and obligations, but above all, what our responsibilities are in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. But again, that doesn't play into the narrative of either the Fabians or the alt-right. They want to go out and say that, look, it is always going to be race-based. That has always been the history of the United States. And where it's not the history of the United States, that is just lofty idealism brought forth by a truly forgotten relic of the past, that being Enlightenment era thinking. And again, it's intellectually disingenuous on their part because it is so disconnected from reality. But reality and the truth are what bind us. They are our anchors. They are what allows this nation to have propelled itself to such lofty heights in its relatively brief yet illustrious history. But again, that is diametrically opposed to the twisted machinations that they are attempting to cram down our throats. So we see that Black Lives Matters is taking this whole notion of identity politics and pushing it into the realm of violence. They are going out and they are trashing their own neighborhoods. They are spreading this sort of dissent that really has no place in an open, honest, but above all, free society like the United States, all in the hopes of fundamentally, drastically, and irreparably transforming the United States. And so ultimately, their goal is to dismantle the Constitution, is to try and create insular and discrete minorities. But when you look at the clear and concise language contained in the 14th Amendment to our shared United States Constitution, equal protection under the law states that you clearly cannot do that. And this whole notion of equal protection under the law can be summarized in saying that the United States of America is a nation of laws and not of men. In other words, we don't allow certain segments of the population to receive special or disparate treatment because that goes against the natural law tenets that form the foundational bedrock basis of our Constitution and our constitutionally endowed Federalist representative Republican form of government. And so that's why they have to engage in this sort of deceit. Again, tying right back into Cloward and Piven, because when they overwhelm the system and they go out and create such violence, they think that they can then topple the system. And of course, that has been their twisted machinations for such a long time now. And you can't reason with people who are simply going out to cause chaos. These agent provocateurs of chaos cannot be reasoned with because they operate from raw, sheer emotionalism. And of course, they have received encouragement from this disastrous Barack Hussein Obama regime. That has been the goal ever since he first assumed the reins of political power back in January of 2009. And folks, I want you to recall this story of how he had that professor friend who was in Massachusetts that was basically trying to break into his own home, and his neighbors, fearing for his property, had called the police, and they came and arrested the man. Now, the charges were ultimately dropped, but Obama used that opportunity to go in front of the mainstream media and try and proclaim that the police acted stupidly. And I do have this soundbite queued up, and I want to go ahead and bring that up now so that we can just have a refresher in what it was he said. So here we go.
Later dropped. Now, I don't know, not having been there and not seeing all the facts, what role race played in that. But I think it's fair to say, number one, any of us would be pretty angry. Number two, that the Cambridge police acted stupidly. What I think we...
So there it is. He said that he thought that the Cambridge police acted stupidly. That ties directly into this dark and twisted narrative of identity politics. Now, he admitted that when he was going out there and speaking to the American people from the bully pulpit of the office of President of the United States, that he hadn't seen all the facts, that he hadn't reviewed all of the facts. And of course, that is an intellectually disingenuous position for the commander-in-chief to take, for the chief executive officer of these United States of America to take. But he doesn't care. It's about a narrative. And this narrative that he just cannot seemingly divorce himself from, nor does he have the desire to take himself away from, is a destructive one. It leads to the sort of anger and the violent outbursts that we have seen in first Baltimore, Maryland, then we've seen it again in Charlotte, North Carolina, we've seen it in Missouri. It's just bizarre. And folks, what it really comes down to is that they are just holistically trying to tear us down and to appeal to raw emotionalism to one segment. Again, in the hopes that they can use that as a crutch at which to lay the blame on our time-honored values, traditions, and institutions. And we see that they do this over and over and over again. It's repetitive to the point of being ad nauseum with respect to the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. But the danger that we have now is that the alt-right is engaging in a similar game of identity politics that really should not be embraced in the United States of America, because again, it goes against that foundational image that our founding fathers dreamed of at the inception of this nation some 235 plus years ago. Folks, there really is no way around this, but it is the dark narrative that they embrace. And so we have to ask ourselves, how do we overcome this? How do we realistically, pragmatically, and intrinsically deal with these sorts of contentious divisions that are being foisted upon us, and when the flames of derision are being fanned by these nefarious elements? We have to do it by going back to basics. And the way that we go back to basics here in the United States of America is to go back to the Constitution. It's not by creating some national police force, as people like the good Reverend Al Sharpton have been pushing for in decade after successive decade. It's not by dismantling our system of government. No, it's by asking ourselves who we are as a nation and as a people, and who do we want to be. If we want to reject the Constitution, then we will continue to see these sorts of untenable situations, these sorts of unacceptable developments plague us, and that in and of itself is a dangerous position to be in, because it shows that we are willing to sacrifice essential liberty for a fleeting sense of security. And of course, it reminds me of the prophetic words of Benjamin Franklin, who said that those who surrender essential liberties for a fleeting sense of security deserve neither liberty nor security, and shall surely have neither. But that is not the message that Obama was conveying in that soundbite I just played. That's not the message that he was trying to put forth to the American people as he spoke to the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. Rather, the message that he was going forth with there was to try and proclaim that the police always have this racist narrative upon which they approach any sort of black person when going about and doing their duties. And this has only been exacerbated with respect to how the Department of Justice, first originally under Attorney General Eric Holder and now being continued under the tutelage of Attorney General Loretta Lynch, are going forth and saying they're going to investigate any of these race-based police incidents or black-involved police incidents as hate crimes. We see it over and over and over again. Of course, one of the first instances was that of the shooting of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman. They wanted to sit there and say that the stand your ground laws are based in racism, except that no, the stand your ground laws applies irrespective of what your skin color is. So again, it's this duplicitous sense of rubbish that the left embraces, and indeed to the same extent that the so-called alt-right embraces, that leads to this sort of nonsense. And it really does create division within the population and within the community where none previously existed. In a sense, what they're really trying to say is that the civil rights movement has not made any success, that we are just as bad as we were during the dark days of the American Civil War, and therefore we will never overcome that, and we have to create special treatment for certain segments of the population. Again, it's based on emotionalism, but the left has always done that. And it's bizarre to see that the right is now beginning to embrace that as well, because it shows that our philosophies and those basic tenets upon which we base our nation are being ignored. But when you ignore those things, you do so at your own peril, because that is how you allow statism and tyranny, despotism and oppression to come in. And these wannabe potentates are going to turn to that each and every time because they think that that is how they can fundamentally transform a nation. And of course, the great weight of the historical evidence proves that to be the case. Recall that with the dying days of the Weimar Republic in Germany, Hitler was able to say, look, it's a certain segment of society that has caused this, and we need to implement and enact new legislation to punish that segment of society that doesn't want to be a part of the greater Germany. That is literally how he was able to cement his power. Now, of course, he exploited all of the just haywire economic circumstances that were befalling the German people at that time, and he tried to implement all of that to his great benefit by trying to accept credit for certain things that were actually Weimar initiatives, such as the Autobahn, or their highway system there. But he said that, look, what I'm doing is creating jobs for Germany. I'm making Germany secure. I am making Germany great again. And that is the dangerous sort of populist narrative that is starting to come forth in the United States. We've seen it reiterated time and time again by the GOP nominee, Donald Trump. He has embraced that with that shallow, hollow, and empty, meaningless platitude of "Make America Great Again" that is his campaign slogan. It's a bit like the empty and meaningless campaign slogan of Barack Hussein Obama back in 2008 of hope and change. Hope and change in what? You see, when you don't expand upon it, and when you don't go forth with what it really means, then yes, you're just embracing something that's feel-good language, something that really doesn't connect with what it will take to place this nation back onto the path to prosperity. And again, recall that with Obama, it's about raw emotionalism. It's not to say that it isn't about that with Donald Trump. It's just from a different perspective. But both of the perspectives are dangerous for the United States. But remember that he said that America was heartless, in a sense. He didn't say it directly. But he did go out to say, to my friends on the left, you know, we've got to talk about these kids dying on the floors of hospitals and all of this sorts of drivel that makes no sense whatsoever and is clearly not the way the United States is. But again, it's part of his narrative. And I've got a soundbite here that I'm going to cue up so that we can hear it, and then we'll go from there to further discuss it. So here we go.
To my friends on the left, I ask you to reconcile your belief in freedom and dignity for all people with those images of children writhing in pain and going still on a cold hospital floor. For sometimes resolutions and statements of condemnation are simply not enough. Indeed, I'd ask every member of Congress and those of you watching at home tonight to view those videos of the attack. And then ask, what kind of world will we live in if the United States of America sees a dictator brazenly violate international law with poison gas?
Now, see, what he was trying to do there was to draw a connection between what was happening in Syria and the United States. He tried to say that, again, it had to be raw emotionalism that was used, but his policy was that of leading from behind. And again, leading from behind is just a way to try and weaken the United States. But also, he was sitting there saying that it was a connection to what happens in our hospitals, part of the whole healthcare reform. It's all part of the same narrative, and it's all based on raw emotionalism. And again, it's why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have tried to warn about allowing yourselves to be pushed into this idea of just raw emotionalism. It leaves you susceptible. It allows con artists and carnival barkers to try and manipulate you. When you are highly susceptible to that, it means you shut down your mental faculties and just rolling emote. And the left has always played that game. They've always played it. Think back to the days of the Volstead Act back in 1919. That was what started the prohibition against alcoholic beverages in the United States. They said that it was for the children, that it was to stop domestic violence and abuse and cheating husbands and husbands who beat their wives and children. But what it really did, through unintended consequences, was that it created organized crime. We saw that the bootleggers came to ascendancy here. In fact, that's how the Kennedys, under Joe Kennedy, built their wealth. He was a bootlegger. It was how the Italian mafia was able to get their grips on society, and violence spread. But on top of that, unsafe alcohol killed people. It literally killed people. And that's what they do. They go forth and they say they're going to fix a problem by creating a new problem, and then they double down on their governmental acts and their governmental approaches, thinking that that is the best way to approach these things. Now, with respect to the poison gas thing, Obama said that he drew a line in the sand, but then he simply erased it. He walked back from it. He disregarded it. When you do that, you project an image of weakness. And that, unfortunately, is what we see not just in foreign affairs, because, yes, ISIS and all of those attacks that have occurred on American soil since he said that it was the JV team are brought about by an inherent flaw and weakness in his policies, but also in the way that he was approaching the law enforcement issues. And what's happening in Charlotte, North Carolina, we see that Loretta Lynch once again goes out and encourages them and says that we have to hear what they're having to say. No, why do we have to hear what people who have vowed to destroy us and to essentially tear this nation apart have to say? I don't care what those people have to say. Those are not the sort of people that you can negotiate with. Those are the sorts of people who need to be relegated to the rubbish bin of history. Now, I'm not saying kill them, but I am saying that they need to be ostracized. They need to be criticized for the truly vindictive sorts of people that they are, and they should not be given any modicum of credibility in the United States. Because as soon as you do that, you are giving them the power that they are just, frothing at the mouth for. They want to have a control over the narrative in the United States of America. And unfortunately, it is the mainstream media that has been a willing accomplice in this, strengthening their position, not really standing up for our first responders and law enforcement officers. And again, that leads to the sort of horrific thing that we saw unfurl in Dallas. And it's what is unfurling in these alleged protests that are occurring in Charlotte, North Carolina. We know that one officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, is facing first-degree manslaughter charges because apparently the guy she shot was unarmed, and maybe she was nervous with it. The videos that I've seen certainly would suggest that she was. And who can blame her after we had, back in the summer of 2015, that Houston Harris County Sheriff's deputy shot in the back of the head while fueling up his cruiser, the Dallas carnage that occurred earlier this summer, and all of the various other attacks against police, such as with the Attorney General Marilyn Mosby there in Baltimore, Maryland. After the Freddie Gray case, she went and tried to prosecute each and every one of the officers who were involved with that. And it came back with an acquittal for each and every one of them. Now, of course, and rightfully so, she is facing this malicious prosecution charges and case, which she deservedly faces, because again, the great weight of the evidence wasn't there. And part of the problem we have here is we are forgetting that our legal system is based on a presumption of innocence. In other words, one in America, even if they are a law enforcement officer, is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But that's not what's happening. The court of public opinion, via the mainstream media, is attempting to convict these people from the get-go. They're playing into the diatribe, they're playing into the seeds of divisiveness, and that is ultimately working against the best interests of the popular sovereigns. So when the police are attacked in such a way, we're going to see a disparate impact on that as well, in that who wants to be a police officer when they are being attacked as readily as they are, as I sit here and speak into this microphone, and they are presumed guilty until proven innocent? You see, that is what is wrong with the way that the left approaches things. They're not approaching it from the traditional pillars of our legal and justice system. And when they do that, it breaks down confidence in the system. It breaks down confidence in our government. And that is a problem, because we are a nation of laws and not of men. But the way that everything is unfurling right now, it shows that we are now becoming a nation of men and not of laws. Now, we've mentioned that with respect to the FBI not doing anything to Hillary Clinton, but it's also true with the way that they are attacking law enforcement and saying that we just need to give this infinite platform to those domestic terrorist organizations like the Black Lives Matters organization. But what it really, really, and honestly comes down to is that they are trying to force identity politics on us, come hell or high water, irrespective of the detrimental and deleterious impact that it will have on our culture, our community, our society, and our popular sovereigns. And unless and until we are willing to actually address this, we're going to see these problems continue. But we can overcome it, as we've overcome every hurdle, obstacle, and adversity in our relatively brief yet illustrious history on God's green earth. We can, because we must, and we will. I'm sure you all know that old adage that says two wrongs don't make a right. That's certainly something I think that will come into play with what we're seeing unfurl there in Charlotte, North Carolina. Blue Lives Matter's website has gone out and reported that the rioters have been using pepper spray to attack police officers. Again, on this whole erroneous notion that the police are just going out to engage in race-based attacks and to deny them their humanity. And again, one of the things that we've seen is that this false narrative of attacking our police officers has become a quintessential aspect of the narrative and message or perception that these domestic terrorist organizations like Black Lives Matters wants to convey. In fact, one of the things they say is if anyone comes forth and says all lives matters, they are not understanding it, or that they are inherently racist, and that that's just proof of the systemic racism that has become a part of the United States of America, or has always been a part of America since her inception some 235 plus years ago. Again, it's a bunch of rubbish. It's nonsense. It's drivel that should not even be given the light of day, yet the mainstream media has been doing exactly that. Why? Because, again, it boils down to this narrative that they wish to convey. And one of the things that I did in a previous Solo Flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program was to point out how in the arena of American politics, oftentimes perception, even if it's a false perception, matters more than reality. And when you fall into that line of thought, and when you fall into that position, it is something that will work to your great detriment each and every time. But what we see is that they're trying to say that it is self-defense or some other nonsense like that that has caused them to go out and start essentially assaulting the law enforcement officers who are merely going out to do their job to try and keep the community stable, to keep an orderly, peaceful community. Again, while it is true that we have the ability to protect ourselves, and that the Supreme Court has said that it is not law enforcement's duty or obligation to keep us safe, it is their duty to protect the community and the rights of the individual popular sovereigns within that community. Again, our entire system is based off of the natural law tenets and the fundamental and inalienable God-given rights that we have that are codified in the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution. Of course, this is not the narrative that groups like Black Lives Matters wishes to convey, because deep down they want to have disparate or special treatment. They want to pit this nation against itself, thereby destabilizing it and allowing them to replace it with their dark and twisted machinations. Now, I know that I've mentioned this before, but it bears repeating again here because it is so on point. But the truth of the matter is that the Black Lives Matters organization is not looking out for the best interests of the Black community. They're not looking to help these people improve their lot in life. They're just sowing the seeds of dissension to try and force Marxism upon us. Again, this sort of drivel that we're seeing play out in front of the cameras is nothing short of cultural Marxism. That's where they seek to implement Marxism a bit like the Fabian socialists in incremental fashion, but they want to take it a more drastic step. They want to step up the pace and to make this a more permanent, lasting, far-reaching impact on society at large. And they do that by saying, look, there's a certain segment of society that has always been discriminated against since the foundation of the nation, that there is no proof positive that this is going to improve, and the only way to improve it is for us to go out there and engage in violence. But no, it's not that. It's that they want to drastically change what the United States of America stands for. And when you have the supposed Department of Justice under the tutelage of originally Attorney General Eric Holder, but now Attorney General Loretta Lynch, giving them credit, saying that we ought to listen to their message and that we ought to give them some sort of credibility, that's when you start to see that the divisiveness of it is going to reach critical mass. In fact, it is my belief that we are already at critical mass, and that we have been there for some time. Race relations in the United States are at an all-time low. They haven't been this bad since the Civil Rights era. And essentially, what the government and these Black Lives Matters terrorist organizations are trying to say is that we've made no progress over the half century or more since the Civil Rights era. But it is a load of bovine excrement. We have made differences. There is no more of an egalitarian or free nation than that of the United States of America. But they don't want to acknowledge it. Again, it's this attempt to revise our history to fit their narrative, to make it fit their plan, because they know that everyone else would tell them that they are full of it. Because when you look at the way that things have progressed since the Civil Rights Movement, we have overcome all of these divisive things that occurred in our past. And we have improved race relations until Barack Hussein Obama came in there and started with this divisive notion and line. Recall that in the first segment, I played that soundbite of Barack Obama going in front of the cameras of the mainstream media and saying that the Cambridge police acted stupidly. That was the start of the narrative. And it is what the Black Lives Matters organization has been embracing after every incident. Now, when you look at the statistics, it shows that white on black shootings are very rare. Very, very rare indeed. And the black community is not addressing the highest statistics of black on black violence. But again, what they try and do to weasel their way out of that is to say that, well, the black on black violence is caused by the disparate conditions that the black community lives in these United States because of the systemic racism that is intrinsically part of our judiciary and indeed every facet of our government. But it's a bunch of drivel. When you peel back the false narrative that they're pushing and look at the primary sources and what's really happening, the numbers speak for themselves. Chicago has had so many murders and black on black violence and gang related violence that is being ignored. Now, maybe they want to say it's racist to include this, but I think we need to. I think that that is the problem that's being ignored, and they're trying to use bread and circuses, for lack of a better term, to try and attack white America. But not just white America, America in general. Because if you recall, the police officer that was involved in the shooting that sparked the Charlotte, North Carolina shootings was a black officer. Now they're going to come out and try and say, well, that means he's just an Uncle Tom. They use those disparaging terms, those disgusting, bigoted terms, because he's working for the man. When in the hell has this ever been acceptable in a post-civil rights era America? I'm going to say that in my living memory, it has not been acceptable, and that we have gone out of our way to try and get rid of this sort of nonsense because we were going to improve ourselves. And here's another thing that needs to be stated. Recall that when Barack Hussein Obama won the highest office in the land the first time in the election of 2008, the media was so quick to rush out and say that we were now in a post-racial America. Are we? Are we, when Black Lives Matters goes out and does this, and when this Obama regime just continuously fans the flames of derision and dissent, and when Obama came out and said that if he had a son, it would look like Trayvon Martin, does that coincide with equal protection under the law? The answer to that is both open and obvious. No, it does not coincide with that. And rather, it's something that they are trying to force down our throats as a new agenda in the United States. They want to turn the people who built this country into the villains. They want us to all feel a sense of shame when we try and proclaim that we are American citizens. And again, it ties into this whole notion of two Americas. Recall that, again, when John Edwards was saying that there are inherently two Americas, this plays into that line. I'm trying to say that the average, ordinary American citizen is propping up a system that is based in division, that's based in hatred, that's based in spearheading these sorts of diabolical schemes. And when you try and get them to point to where this direct racism exists, they can't point it out. So in order to get around that, they deploy the tactic that Zygmunt Dobbs brought up in his magnus opus of Keynes at Harvard, of engaging in semantics, creating these fluff terms to once again divide the attention of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, away from the truth, so that we are caught up in these penultimate concerns, thereby allowing the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists to continue to force their agenda down our throats and against our will. That's why it's so important that we foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding, not only of our shared United States Constitution, but also of our fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, the God of nature himself. In so doing, we can begin to peel back the layers of the arguments that are being put forth and this false narrative and perception that is being created by these diabolical groups. They are going out there and doing this because they want everyone else to pay for them. They want to blame society for the problems that are facing us. And in that sense, they are acting in a postmodern capacity, or in the sense of a postmodernist. It's not that it's connected in any way, shape, or form to the facts as they're on the ground, but it is their false narrative, which they think they can get political hay with. Recall that with the Missouri shooting, they tried to say that it was hands up, don't shoot, except that the man never put his hands up. He was acting in an aggressive fashion. He was acting with hostility towards the officer that was involved. And nobody likes to talk about how Officer Wilson's career was destroyed. They don't want to talk about all of the nightmares that were there, nor do they want to talk about the truth that so many officers, when it involves a black assailant or suspect, they don't want to react. They hesitate because they know that the way that the government is reacting right now and the way that society and the mainstream media is spinning and peddling this false narrative, that they are going to be blamed first and foremost. We have got to get past this, because unless and until we are willing to get past it, we're going to continue to see these problems skyrocket and to spin out of control. And so how do we expect our officers to keep themselves safe? Why is it that those who went out and shot that Texas Harris County Sheriff's deputy in the summer of 2015 are not condemned with the same weight that the officers have been condemned? Why is it that we are not condemning people like Marilyn Mosby with the same vociferous veracity that we have with respect to law enforcement in general? Again, it's this idea of identity politics, splitting us into these two separate Americas, where in fact there is but one America, and that these agent provocateurs of anarchy and chaos are working to fundamentally, drastically, and irreparably tear us apart. And in so doing, they can then get away with whatever they want. It's a chance for them to engage in this destructive, diabolical behavior, but it does not coincide with who we are as a nation and as a people. Then, with respect to, I believe they were called the Keith family, it was, yes, Keith Scott family says that the video doesn't show if he had a gun, but they won't say what was in his hand. Now, the false narrative was that he was just this innocent black man with a book in his hands. But I'm not so sure that that's the case. And again, this is the danger of trying to prosecute these cases in the court of public opinion as opposed to in a court at law. Because the court of public opinion does not have the evidentiary standards and rules that carry forth into a court at law. And that's why we have the rules of evidence. It is to ensure that prejudicial outsets and this are not created, are not erroneously allowed to come in and to taint the process of justice. Unfortunately, what we see with this reckless approach by the so-called mainstream media is that they are allowing this to come to fruition. They are essentially peddling a narrative that may or may not be. Well, I think it is intellectually disingenuous to peddle a narrative when you know it's not the case, unless you're marking it as some sort of opinion piece. Now, what I'm stating right now as I sit here and speak into this microphone is my opinion. My opinion based on my legal training, based on how I'm looking upon the facts as they unfurl, and based upon the history of these types of cases. Now, does that mean that there is not racism in this country? No, I'm not saying that at all. But it does. The best way to respond to it is certainly not in the manner in which we have been with respect to these sorts of black-involved police incidents during the tenure of Barack Hussein Obama. This approach of trying to fan the flames, of trying to convict police officers in the court of public opinion, to try and make the entire system of law enforcement be punished for this, just does not accomplish anything other than destroying the domestic tranquility of the United States of America. And again, that in and of itself is something that moves against the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Think back to what the opening lines of the preamble to our shared United States Constitution said. We, the people, established the Constitution in order to promote domestic tranquility and to secure justice. But that's not what's happening under this Barack Hussein Obama regime. It's certainly not what happened under Marilyn Mosby. It's not what happened with the way that they tried to make George Zimmerman, a white Hispanic, trying to inject race into that when I don't think race was really a part of it. What I think it was he thought someone was going to be breaking into houses, and that when Trey started attacking him, he was in fear for his life. Had the stand your ground law, just as Texas has the stand your ground law. What that means is you are allowed to defend yourself if you believe that your life is in imminent jeopardy of severe bodily harm or death. And that is what played out both in the Officer Darren Wilson case, in the Trayvon Martin case, and we don't know whether that was the case in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Again, the facts just have not been fully examined, and it is up for the finder of fact to determine that. And if she is guilty, and if she did act recklessly, then yes, I say hold her fully accountable, she being the officer involved in the Tulsa, Oklahoma shooting. Otherwise, I say that we need to let our criminal justice system work out as it was designed and intended to be the fair system of justice that our criminal justice system was always intended to be. And folks, make no bones about it, we have the fairest, the most impartial criminal justice system in the entire world. That does not mean that it's a perfect system. I'm not going to fall into that ridiculous drivel that has been pushed forth by people like Edmund Coase. I believe that we did not achieve perfection. I don't believe it is possible for us to achieve perfection in this earthly realm. But I do think that we have got the closest thing to it out of any nation on God's green earth. And you see, this is the sort of context that the mainstream media should be applying to it. This is the way that you should analyze these sorts of tragic situations. But we're not. The flames of dissension. We are fanning the flames of division. And we are doing it because, I guess for the media, they think it's going to give them ratings. But also on top of that, it promotes this twisted agenda of theirs, which is to force Fabian socialism down our throats. Damn the torpedoes, disregard all of the consequences that it will have on society at large, because again, it's about their propagandistic goal and agenda. But that doesn't play out for the American people. It doesn't serve us. It only places us in this precarious position, which shows no signs of improving at any time in the foreseeable future. And ultimately, I think that is the great tragedy of the so-called or alleged two Americas that they say currently exist right now. It's that they are disregarding the things that unify us. They don't even look for ways to try and unify us. And think of the way that they are using it now with Black studies in the marbled halls and the ivory tower of academia in this country. We know that they have these Black studies that they now want to be limited to Black students or to minorities. Again, what is that? Separate but equal education? So we're going to bring back the dark days of segregation. We're going to disregard Brown versus Board of Education and try and bring back Plessy versus Ferguson? Why don't they discuss this? Why doesn't the media touch this? It's because, again, that would go against the narrative that they have that America is systemically racist. Not that it's the left that's actually systemically racist and has been since its inception. Think back to how Margaret Sanger's original purpose in creating Planned Parenthood was to engage in eugenics against the Black community. Yet the left goes out and sings the praises of Margaret Sanger. They don't want to say that it was about this pseudoscience that she had of racial supremacy. They don't want to talk about how eugenics was something that was engaged in by those who were pushing for the ignoring of our shared constitution, people such as Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., when he said that we ought to just eradicate those who have mental disabilities to spare two generations of idiots. it's beyond belief. It is unfathomable to see that they can engage in this sort of horrific nonsense and diatribe and propaganda against the United States and not be held accountable. But part of the reason for that is you don't find that in our institutions of education. You have to go back to the primary sources. They're there, but these nefarious elements that have come together in a form of a conglomeration on the left are purposefully, intentionally, willfully trying to sweep that aspect of history under the rug. Because if they admit that that is a real problem and that that is something that impacts us, then it will cause their entire narrative to unravel. And of course, their narrative is about unraveling the societal fabric of the United States of America instead of drawing the American people together in solidarity and unity. And so we have to be aware of that and cognizant of what it is that they're doing, because it is so dangerous. It is dangerous because it plays into this sort of hatred that can easily cause violence to come to the forefront. And then when they go forth and say, hands up, don't shoot, as if these black activists don't believe that black people can commit crimes, that's creating a new type of racist point of view. And think about how during the Zimmerman case, they kept showing just very, very old pictures of Trayvon Martin, trying to paint him off as some angel, when in fact he wasn't. He had engaged in thuggery. He had been one that had broken into houses before, and he was, in a sense, for lack of a better term, a juvenile delinquent. But again, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists, leftists, and their allies in the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media wanted to portray a far different narrative. A narrative in which they could condemn the traditions and institutions of the United States of America, as they have been so apt to do for such a long period of time. And of course, they try and juxtapose this with a picture of Zimmerman that looked bad. And they did the same thing with Officer Darren Wilson, and they did the same thing with Freddie Gray, and they're going to do the same thing with this Keith Scott family, well, not just the family, but Keith Scott himself, because it plays into their narrative. It shows that they can try and point out and say, look, America is at her very heart a racist nation. She always has been, she always will be. But again, is that really the truth? When we sit back and ask ourselves the soul-searching questions that we need to in order to overcome these diabolical schemes and machinations, these false perceptions, these propagandistic initiatives, we find that the evidence really does not point to it. Again, it's all about this false narrative, and it ultimately plays out to a game of power, corruption, and control. That is the trifecta of what the left is trying to bring about in this nation. And identity politics plays directly into it. And it ties into the other disastrous two doctrines that they have, that of political correctness and moral relativism. And when you tie that in to how we see this occurring just after those Islamo-fascist terrorist attacks, we see that the narrative is set. We can't blame Islamofascism and the Islamofascist state of ISIS for encouraging these lone wolf sorts of terrorist attacks that make it very difficult to find these people and very difficult to maintain national security. But at the same time, we're going to blame law enforcement personnel or our fundamental and inalienable God-given right to keep and bear firearms for terrorism and violence. Again, it's just a false narrative. And that's why we have to look for the truth. That's why we must be vigilant and proactive and look at the primary sources for ourselves, because in so doing, we take the power back from those forces that want to illicitly concentrate it in the hands of the central government, because the central government can't really address it. Take, for instance, the guy that was involved in the New York bombings in this most recent one. His father had reported him to the FBI, saying, hey, I'm worried. The FBI ignored it. There were reports that Tashfeen Malik and Saeed Farouk and Omar Mateen were dangerous too. They ignored it. Think back to the Chechnyans there, the Tsarnaev brothers, Tamerlane and the other one. They were on the radar, but ignored. Because again, there was information overload. And so what they're trying to do is to say that we don't need to have the Fourth and Fifth and Sixth Amendments anymore, that we just need to have all of this information. But how does sacrificing our essential liberties for a fleeting sense of security that doesn't even gain that help us? Again, it ties right back into the words that Benjamin Franklin said all those many years ago when he said that those who sacrifice essential liberties for a fleeting sense of security deserve neither liberty nor security and shall surely have neither. He was directly speaking to a scenario and situation like what we're seeing in the United States of America today as I sit here and speak into this microphone. It's one of those things that we simply cannot ignore because it has been one of those overlapping and overarching problems that has come to the forefront throughout the disastrous 2 terms of this Barack Hussein Obama regime. But of course, the mainstream media is going to want to continue to go down this path of spinning this false narrative without any regard to exactly what has happened in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. And so again, it falls on us in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty to seek out the truth. You have to look into this. You have to seek out the truth for yourself. Otherwise, the narrative that they are peddling is going to become the accepted norm. They are going to try and rewrite our history. They're going to try and proclaim that the United States is and always has been a racist nation, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. There are not 2 Americas, folks. There is one America. And in that America, we the people are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. That means that we the people are the only ones that can bring this nation back to the path to prosperity. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Folks, she does not have 2 airplanes to be on. That would be physically impossible. As always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Wright Flyer. I invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you may have either here on our YouTube page or our Google Plus page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my First Officer Jeremy Graventon, our Blogspot account where we place audio-only versions of our state-of-the-art radio program, as well as blog posts and other things, just chock full of useful information. And then there's the Cafe Press account, where you can find all sorts of clothing, apparel, drinking glasses, shot glasses, laptop bags, tote bags, laptop protectors, phone protectors, clocks, watches, with either our original Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer logo on it, or our first class passenger logo on it. With such a wide array of useful things, I'm sure you'll find something that meets your needs at a reasonable price. Go ahead and take a gander at that, folks, and give us a little bit of support, because we are doing this to empower you. As always, folks, thank you for flying the Wright Flyer. We will see you again next time. Do take care.